Our public schools are the cornerstone of our community. The education and opportunities we provide for students today shape their futures and ours. Schools, like any organization, need money to operate, but in Wisconsin, funding the needs of our schools has been a growing challenge. State policy limits how much school districts can spend. The vast majority of school funding comes from a combination of state dollars and local property taxes. It's called the revenue limit, and it acts as a cap per student that school districts can spend each year. Even if school costs go above this level, schools can't spend any more than this limit. From 1994 to 2009, these revenue caps were adjusted for inflation, which meant they helped schools keep up with ongoing needs. But since 2010, the resources districts need to survive have fallen farther and farther behind the basic costs to operate our schools. Since 2013, the gap in statewide K-12 funding has grown, with the revenue limit falling more than $2,300 per student behind inflation. This means if funding had kept up with inflation, the Hudson School District would have an additional $11,500,000 in funds. What's more, each district has a different revenue cap, and these caps are not tied to the needs of the students or the costs to the schools that serve them. Our job as a school district is to make sure all of our students have access to the exceptional educational opportunities we provide, no matter what their needs when they walk through our doors. But state funding falls short of what it costs to meet the specific needs of many of our students. When that happens, we have to use money from our general fund to cover the difference, which means taking dollars from other important needs. The largest portion of our budget goes towards staffing. Our people are the heart of our schools. Without enough educators who instruct, support, and inspire learning, schools can't provide the lessons, programs, and opportunities our students deserve. Other important budget items include curriculum, technology, transportation, operations, and maintenance. We work hard to balance our budgets, yet resources for schools have been shrinking year after year since 2010. With costs growing so much faster than funding, districts are always looking for ways to trim costs and work smarter, like deferring needed school maintenance, cutting programs, reducing staff, and many other strategies. In 2023 to 2024, the Hudson School District reduced its staffing budget by nearly $808,000 and anticipates another $998,501 in reductions for the 2024 to 2025 school year. But schools can only cut so much before they start to harm educational opportunities for their students. To maintain class sizes, keep up with rising costs, take care of school buildings, and protect high-quality instruction, many districts have turned to their community to help fill the state-imposed funding gap. Since the arrival of revenue limits, over 80% of school districts have done so by asking local voters to raise their caps through an operating referendum. Most have used the option multiple times. Our children don't have time to wait for state policymakers to fix the school funding system. By putting the needs of our students first, we are investing in their potential and the future of our whole community. Strong schools make strong communities where families want to move and stay. Learn more about school finance in Wisconsin by visiting our website. And don't forget to vote on or before November 5th.
Hello and welcome to another segment of Western Wisconsin Journal. I'm Jamie Johnson, the government and political correspondent, and my guest today is the Superintendent of Schools, Dr. Nick Ouellette. Nick, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Jamie.
Well, usually when we have you on, it's about a construction project or it's about a referendum. So I'm guessing we have a referendum coming up.
We do have a referendum coming up in a few weeks, absolutely.
All right. Well, obviously you and I have talked about this quite a bit because my other role as a school board member. You were hired in the district in 2015, and things have changed a little bit. So folks are going to go to the ballot, go to the voting booths on November 5th and see a referendum on the ballot. So what is being asked of the voters?
Absolutely. So we're going for a $5 million reoccurring referendum. That's the ask on November 5th. And what that basically means is it gives the board the authority to levy up to an additional $5 million in any given year to cover our spending. And so the reason it's reoccurring is because it's not for facilities, it's not for one-time projects, it's for ongoing expenses. And so the mill rate impact on that $5 million is about 4 cents. And so people say, well, what does that mean? Put it in perspective. And so we usually try to say per 100,000 of house value, and so that's about $4 per 100,000 because it's easy to ramp that up and multiply it. But the average house being close to $500,000 in our district, so the average homeowner could see about a $20 increase for the entire year related to this referendum.
And that increase is only if the school board then utilizes that increased cap.
Correct. Yep.
And so I guess backing up, why are there caps on the revenue that a school district can impose?
Absolutely. So revenue limits were imposed back in the mid to early 90s, and then when they were imposed, they were tied to CPI, Consumer Price Index. So they went up every year based on what inflation was. But back in 2010, the legislature decided to decouple them from CPI, and that's when the problems kind of started because we're not getting those inflationary increases just to make our ends meet as we do things. And just to give some perspective on that inflationary increase, if we just would have gotten inflation increases from 2010 to current, so just
That's
CPI,
about 14 years.
About 14 years, we would have about $2,200 more per pupil spending authority, which is about $11 million, a little over $11 million. What we're asking with this referendum is trying to recoup about $5 million of that. We're not even trying to get all the way back to where we would be with CPI, but we're trying to get at least halfway there.
This is not something that is unique to Hudson. There are other districts that do this. In fact, Hudson did this a while back, but when was the last time that Hudson did that?
So Hudson's last successful operational levy was back in 2001. It was for about $1.2 million, but the board actually didn't fully implement that levy until almost 2022. And so,
why was it that they were able to not need that money?
Well, we had increasing enrollment all the way, for about 15 years. We had tremendously increasing enrollment as Hudson was growing as a community. But it wasn't until our enrollment started going down that we had to start to bite into that levy.
Okay. And now, so enrollment's been going down for a period of time. And again, there's a lot of factors in that. We won't get into the big details. But I know that our school district has had different referendums. We've had growth spurts where we added a couple schools and built a middle school, all based on demographer projections. And after the 2008 Great Recession, it really changed a lot of the projections. And then you throw on top of it COVID. So that's been having a role in our enrollment. But what are some of the sources that we have besides property tax for funding our schools?
Absolutely. So when I arrived in Hudson in 2015, about 2/3 of our revenue came from state aid. So the state sent the money to us, and about 1/3 was property tax. People often wonder, what about the federal money? Well, federal money is usually distributed based on income levels or poverty levels in a school district. Because Hudson has such a low poverty level, our federal dollars are less than 2% of our budget. And so now, fast forward 10 years, because the state aid hasn't kept up, we're actually now 2/3 property tax funded, about 1/3 state aid funded. And so the state has kind of pushed that burden more onto local property taxpayers.
And there's some school districts in the state that are almost 100% property tax.
That's correct. Some of the districts in our northern part of our CISA that are lake districts and things like that, touristy districts, they're almost all 100% property tax.
Without getting too highly technical, and I know our viewers are going to have seen a video that's on the school website. They can go if they have questions. But how is it that you can have a school district be 100% on property tax? What is it about the school funding formula in which penalizes Hudson?
Yeah. So just in general, what happens is the state looks at how much property value you have in your school district, and they divide that by the number of students you have, and it comes up with a number. And Depending on what that number is, you either look like a very wealthy district, property wealthy district, or a property poor district. And so when you're a more property wealthy district like Hudson is, they start to negatively aid you. So they start to take aid away and pull it away. And some districts that are really property wealthy, they take so much aid away that essentially it's all left on property tax. But just this year alone, for example, because of our mix of our student ratio to property value, the state takes away $6.1 million in state aid from our budget just this year alone. That number just came in today.
Okay. And so now the school district will have to be setting the levy, and then we have but the election is on November 5th. So how's that going to work for the budget for 24, 25?
Yep, so the board will set the levy on the 28th, and they'll pass a resolution they've talked about related to if the referendum passes, this is what the levy will be. If the referendum doesn't pass, this is what the levy will be. And so there's about a 4-cent difference in the mill rate. So if it doesn't pass, the levy will be slightly smaller. Not tremendously smaller, because one of the things we've been doing in the district is we've been trying to buy down our debt to prepay it so that we save interest, money on interest and things along those lines. And so part of what we're doing to minimize or mitigate the impact to taxpayers with this operational levy is we'll be reducing some of those prepayments in order to feather in the operational levy.
All right, so we've talked about the concept of essentially exceeding the cap on a recurring basis, but this was just on the ballot for our voters in this district last year, April of
23. Yep.
23. So what has changed? Back then you were asking for over 8 million.
Yep.
Now it's 5 million.
Absolutely. So it was, back in April of 23, it didn't pass 52-48, and we went back to the voters and said, what do you need to see us do?
So you did a survey?
We did a survey. They call them a post-mortem survey, for lack of a better term, and asking me, what do you like to see us do? And so one, they said you need to get rid of the land that you have on UU, and so we put that up for sale. It's under contract, and we're working on closing on that in the next month or two. They talked about the district office, moving it into one of the buildings, so we'll be moving into the middle school, and the district office has been listed for sale.
So you're reducing the footprint of the school
Reducing the footprint of the school district. And then the third thing they said is you need to make cuts in your budget before you ask for more money. And so in the last year and a half, we've cut almost $2 million of staffing out of our budget to try to make adjustments to make things work. And so, but we're getting to the point now where continuing to cut is going to start to have some pretty big impacts on what people are used to seeing for services from our district.
All right, so now we don't have to run through a full litany, but what options would there be if we didn't have this ability to exceed the cap?
It really comes down, if we didn't have the ability to do a revenue override or a levy override, it would be cut. That's what you'd have to do is reduce the amount of expenditures. And for us, about 80% of our budget, 85% of our budget is on personnel, because we're in the people business. We teach kids. And so we would need to start to cut and reduce some of the offerings that we have, potentially change the way we do class sizes, things along those lines, because there's no way around it. We would have to start reducing people.
The need for this $5 million is projected based on enrollment continuing to decline modestly compared to what the recent enrollment declines have been?
Yep. So we're anticipating we're going to still continue to see some declining enrollment. And again, the declining enrollment is the biggest change is, we're bringing in classes of 300 in kindergarten and graduating classes of 450 at the high school. And so that's one of our big, challenges. But we're seeing that starting to taper off a little bit as some of those big classes are working their way out of the high school, and things are stabilizing at the elementary.
All right. And so if enrollment were to stop declining or even actually increase a little bit, would we then need to use this $5 million override?
A lot of it just depends on each situation. It's hard to know. The one thing we're trying to do is we're trying to maintain programming. We're trying to attract and retain quality staff to put in front of kids and make sure that we have the things that people want. So, it's really hard to know, because the other thing is we're relying on Governor Evers' veto, which increases our funding by about $300 a child. So Governor Evers' veto is, if that goes away, that could exacerbate our problem by about $1.5 million a year. And so, that creates some real challenges for us as we continue to move forward.
All right, so now we mentioned a little bit about how this is a statewide issue as far as revenue caps. So how is that being handled in other school districts?
Yeah, absolutely. It's being handled very similarly. It's a lot of operational referendums. So this year alone, 149 out of the 421 school districts in the state are going to operational referendum. Over 85% of the school districts in the state are currently using an operational referendum to make ends meet. So a lot of districts are on their second, third, or fourth operational referendum to try to make up for lack of funding coming from the states. So we're not unique. River Falls went for one last spring. St. Croix Central has gone for one in the last 2 or 3 years. Somerset has gone for one. I mean, our neighbors are going for them as well.
And these referendums, they do translate, though, into potential benefits for students. I mean, we've seen some of our neighbors, you mentioned a couple, that have done referendum overrides and then turned around and offered their teachers more money to be able to retain and attract good teachers.
Yeah, I mean that's one of the rationales for the referendum is to be able to attract and retain quality staff in front of our kids. And so in order to be able to do that, we have to be able to pay them. And education is no different than any other market. There's a market out there, and you have to pay a certain wage in order to get good people. And it is challenging. And as there's been more and more of a teacher shortage, they've become more and more free agents, so to speak, where they're in a higher demand. And so you have to be able to make sure that you can meet what the market demands of the salaries.
And we mentioned salaries because how much of our budget does that comprise?
Somewhere between 80 to 85% is benefits, salary and benefits, somewhere in there for all of our staff.
And so if people say, well, why don't you just use less paper, or why don't you, stop teaching, music to kids and stuff like that, what kind of impact does that have on the budget?
Yeah, I mean, so 80 to 85% of our budget is staffing, and then about another 10% of our budget is fixed costs like electricity, utilities, transportation, things along those lines. So really you're only talking about 5 to 10% of our budget that is actual discretionary. So things that we'd buy curriculum with, technology, maintain our buildings, those pieces. And so even if we didn't make a single copy this entire year, we couldn't save enough to balance things into the budget. It just doesn't work that way.
Okay. So if people have other questions regarding this referendum, where could they go?
Yeah, you can go to our website. It's right at the top of our website. November 5th referendum. We just want to make sure we're getting the correct information out to people. Sometimes misinformation happens, and so you can absolutely go to our website. There's a video on our Facebook page, on our Instagram page as well. We just ask that people try to find the correct information and vote based on information.
Oh, here's another one. And when we attended one of your meetings, you've been going around to groups trying to go to folks who traditionally don't have connections to the school. And these were seniors, and one of the questions was, well, if enrollment is going down, then why do you need to raise the revenue cap?
Yep.
And if you could explain that.
Absolutely. So enrollment is kind of linear, as it declines, but yet, when we cut, it's more of a stair step. And so, a classic example would be 4th grade at Hudson Prairie. The 4 sections last year of 27 kids in each class, but this year there's 4 sections with 25 kids in each class. And so there's not anything to cut. We can't combine into 3 classes because the numbers would be too high, but yet we just lost $100,000 worth of revenue based on those 4 classes.
Because so 8 students translates to about $100,000 in state
Exactly. Exactly. And so that's where it becomes, a little bit more challenging. It's not as easy as people would like to make it out to be, that we can just, well, if this is down here, that's there. If we're down 100 students at the elementary, that would be like $1.2, $1.3 million. But that could be 1 student in every class in our elementary.
We have 96 sections.
96 sections. And so that's just by cutting 1 student in a class doesn't necessarily mean that the class is going to be small enough that you can combine it with another class.
Okay. So it can be complicated, but you know, Hudson residents have a history of supporting our schools.
Absolutely.
And they did approve the one override, and that was for 1.5 million, and adjusted for inflation, it'd be around of what we're asking for now. But then it ended up not necessarily being used, and it's dependent on lots of things, enrollment, and as you mentioned, it could be litigation with regard to state aid and so forth. But these are things that we try to have control over, and we're projecting this out. We should be good if it passes for a good 4 to 5 years.
Yeah, at least. Yeah, we'd like to think so. I mean, we'll continue to make budget adjustments and cuts and things like that if our enrollment continues to decline. So we don't want people to think that this is just a, hey, we only want help on the revenue side. We'll continue to look on the expense side of the equation as well and look for ways we can become more efficient in how we operate as a school district.
Very good. All right. Thanks a lot, Nick, for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.
I'll let you go. I know you said you got lots of conferences today. It's that time of year for student conferences, and you're a parent in the district. So with that, I want to say thank you for watching another segment of Western Wisconsin Journal. And remind our voters, get out, vote on November 5th, and become educated on the issues. Please ask questions if there's anything you have a question about. You can even reach out to me individually as well. But the school district website has plenty of information. So thank you for watching, and until next time, I'm Jamie Johnson.